Welcome everybody to the second in our series of Nature at Home webinars, Wonders of the Central West, hosted by the Victorian National Parks Association. My name is Caitlin, and I have the pleasure of introducing this session and hosting our final question time. To start with, we as the Victorian National Parks Association acknowledge the many First Peoples of the area now known as Victoria and honour their continuing connection to caring for country. We offer our respects to elders past, present and future. The Victorian National Parks Association has been at the forefront of nature conservation for almost 70 years. We share a vision of Victoria to have a diverse, healthy, natural environment protected and respected by all. This evening, our Executive Director, Matt Ruckle, and nature conservation campaigners Shannon Hurley and Jordan Crook will take you deep into the forests of the Central West. They'll share with you the decades-long efforts to protect these remarkable places. We'll also be joined by two incredible community leaders who are at the heart of this remarkable campaign. We're lucky to have Gail Osborne from Wombat Forest Care and Wendy Radford from Wellsford Conservation Alliance and the Bendigo District Environment Council as guest speakers. But before we begin, we're excited to share with you one of our new campaign video. So welcome all, please sit back and enjoy.
She is beauty and she is breathing. Put yourself in her roots. Her feet are buried deep in the cool soil and her roots sprawling out like long, curious toes. Her bark protects her skin from the elements, just as our skin protects ours. Her veins pulse sap around her body, just as blood is pumped around ours. This statuesque beauty is one of thousands here in the forest of Mount Cole in Victoria's Central West. Often unnoticed or forgotten, despite the abundance of life she creates and supports. The powerful owl with her slow, deep, double hoots and high beam eyes. The bright red flowering shrub, the Mount Cole grevillea, above roots found in these forests and nowhere else on earth. The flame robin, one of astounding 130 kinds of birds that coast through these canopies. Trees use scent to talk to one another and other forest residents. Imagine the stories they could tell if you could speak their language. This forested landscape of Mount Cole and the Pyrenees Ranges once stretched much further and wider than it does today. What little now remains now supports the majority of biodiversity, the birds, reptiles, plants, insects and us. But what remains is not safe. These trees and the small but mighty worlds that depend on them are literally on the chopping block. Logging is occurring right now in these forests of Mount Cole. The federal and state governments have a special agreement to log these native forests of the Central West. Our environmental laws would usually protect this habitat and the wildlife that depends on it. But this special contract, known as a regional forest agreement, basically switches off these laws, leaving the powerful owls, the Wimmera River, the grevillea and all the other wonders of the West vulnerable to logging. We need more of our habitats protected, and we need them protected now. These threats might loom large, but at the end of the day, they're just decisions made by people. And these decisions can be changed if enough people stand up and speak out for them. We need to recognise the wealth of these forests and act for them, because if we don't, who is going to then be the voice for the powerful owl or the Mount Cole grevillea or the Wimmera River? It is wrong and senseless to send plants and animals extinct, but it isn't illegal. A new national park is one of the best ways to protect our wildlife against logging, development and damaging uses that profit a handful at the expense of all of us. But until our elected representatives decide to create a park refuge for Mount Cole and the Central West, none of this is safe. A national park returns nature to us all to look after and restore, to take care of as stewards and custodians. Mount Cole is a small but iridescent gem in this fragmented landscape. So let's shine a light on the forgotten forests of Mount Cole. And how can we make this happen? by asking the Victorian Government to implement new national parks for Mount Cole and the central west of Victoria right now, and do not delay. And in the words of David Attenborough, we too rely on the natural world for every mouthful of food that we eat and every lungful of air that we breathe.
So fantastic video. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon, and everybody else who worked on that. Matt Rookall's my name. I'm the Executive Director of the Victorian National Parks Association. And I'm only going to say a few words and hand you over to some of the others to talk about in a bit more detail. But I just wanted to give a little bit of context around why the VNPA think these campaigns, these areas are so important, and why we've campaigned on it for so many years. And really, this is a case study, if you like, in persistence. The origins of the work, where we're getting hopefully towards the end, towards the better protect these places, started in the 1990s, and in some places earlier, particularly around the Wombat, where there was big disputes over clear felling and so on. We already had in the early 2000s commitments to do investigations to assess the areas for national parks, which didn't happen. Likewise in Wellsford, there was efforts put in during box ironbark investigations in the 90s to get those places protected, but they were missed. In 2010, the VNPA did a further assessment to sort of restart the interest, I suppose, a thing called the Better Protection for Special Places, or the Small Parks Report, where we looked at these areas, made recommendations about the particular blocks, highlighted the conservation values, and a number of other groups like Wombat Forest Care in coalition with Wellsford groups, and the Wilderness Society also produced a number of conservation reports on the conservation values of these important places. And the one thing that became really clear out of that, in fairly fragmented landscapes, these places are critically important. It took us quite a bit longer, as it does with conservation campaigns, and finally in 2016, partly due to changes of government and chopping and changing of administrations, we managed to get the first VAC investigation started, or the current VAC investigation started. So tonight we'll talk to you about where we're up to with that campaign, talk about some of the values, hear from some people who really know a lot about the forests. So thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for coming along. I'll now hand you over to Shannon. Shannon's one of VNPA's Nature's Conservation campaigners. She's been deeply involved in the last few years in working on getting a commitment to protect these places in national parks and other sorts of conservation reserves, amongst many other issues. So welcome, Shannon.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for joining us this evening. I am just going to share my screen, and it is all going to run very smoothly. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So I'm just going to give you just a few of the reasons tonight why a Central West National Park. And there are many reasons which I could easily rattle off on all my fingers and toes, but tonight we're just going to cover a few of those most important reasons why we feel we desperately need a Central West National Park. So before we get into it, just a bit of context for those of you who may not have seen these forests in person in real life. Alrighty, so you can see here on the right of your screen, there's a tiny little map which just puts into perspective where these forests are located in terms of Melbourne. And the great thing about these forests here is that they're all within a couple of hours drive from Melbourne. And so the closest here you'll notice is the Wombat Forest. which is, within an hour, hour and a half's drive from Melbourne, depending on where in the Wombat Forest you're located. And then north of the Wombat here, we've got the Wellsford Forest, which is just near Bendigo there, within a couple of hours drive from Melbourne. And then further over to the west is the Pyrenees and Mount Cole, within a couple of hours drive from Melbourne as well. So just to put those forests into perspective about what we're actually looking at in terms of protection. So this was the report here that was recommended in June last year to have these incredible forests protected in a series of new national parks, 50,000 hectares roughly, and then a further almost 20,000 hectares of additional regional parks. So it's really look at balancing the need to protect our wildlife and our biodiversity with the need for also people to get out there and explore and do lots of activities that they enjoy as well. And so this is a heavy texted slide, but really what I want you to take away from the slide is just that across all of the areas is recommended to be either new national parks, particularly for the Wombat, Loda Derg, the Pyrenees and Mount Cole, as well as a whole lot of other smaller parks with different levels of protection. And then in addition to the existing Bendigo National Park. So let's take a bit of a dive into what are some of these key reasons why we need Central West National Parks. So one of those is that these forests are actually really important for protection if we look at a statewide level. Okay, so these forests are really at the end of the Great Dividing Range, and given that Victoria is the most cleared landscape and the most cleared state in all of Australia, the west of Victoria particularly, it has some of the most cleared landscapes in the state. And so these forests, if you can have a look by this photo here, which was actually taken the top of the forest of Mount Cole, you can see just how cleared this landscape really is. And so they used to stretch much further and wider than what they currently do today. But because of our history in terms of resource extraction, vegetation removal and pest, plant and animals, obviously this has been severely contracted. And some of these forests are the only forested mountains north of the Otways. And we know that the public land is where the majority of our wildlife and biodiversity call home. And so that's why it's really critical that we do what we can to protect what we do have left. And so these forests really are the wildlife gems of the West. And so we continue on a bit of a journey for some of the other amazing reasons why we need these Central West forests. So they are home to 380 rare or threatened species. So to the left here is we have the powerful owls, which can be found, for example, in the Wombat Forest and the Forest of Mount Cole. And then we have the really cute little greater glider here on the right-hand side. And just to give you a bit of a context for how important particularly the Wombat Forest is for the greater glider, BMPA and Wombat Forest Care released this report earlier on this year highlighting just how critical the Wombat Forest is for these cute little furry critters. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this map here, which shows the Wombat State Forest as it currently stands. And particularly here, you will see all these little black dots here. Now, these are black dots of greater glider records, so where greater gliders have been spotted before. And thanks to Wombat Forest Care and Gail, which we'll hear from shortly, really, her group and the work that has been done in this space has really put the greater glider on the map in this forest. And so you can see it, the map above this just gives you a context for the Wombat Forest and those records in the context of the rest of the state. And given that in East Gippsland, unfortunately, there has been a decline of about 50% in the last 12 years for these greater gliders, the Wombat Forest really is a really critical stronghold for the survival of this species. And, if that's not a good enough reason that we need to protect the Wombat Forest, I don't know what is. So, as well as having our threatened species in these forests, there's also a number of different rare species which are found here in these forests and nowhere else on the planet. An example of those is the Mount Cole gorilla on the left-hand side here. Now, if anyone has had a chance to visit Mount Cole and see these, they have these beautiful red flowers, which are spectacular to the eye, which you can usually see in the month of November. And to get up close and personal to these beauties is really a treat, given that they're found there and nowhere else in the world. And then on the right here, you've got the Wombat bossia, which is also found in the Wombat Forest and nowhere else. So when we look at in terms of the whole state, in terms of our habitats, which we are protecting, the really important thing about if we do get a national park for these forests is it will actually protect 43 important habitat types. And this is really important in a statewide level, because out of all the different habitat types we have here in Victoria, there are a number which really are not protected up to the benchmarks that they need to be. And by just accepting these recommendations for new parks actually contributes significantly to the protection of our habitats across the whole state. And so another reason why we need these national parks is because it's been almost a decade until we've had significant additions to our Victorian parks estate. And given that the threats that we're seeing that's really impacting and how much we are encroaching on nature, and that is only escalating, we really need to be escalating to match that, the protection of nature and these forested landscapes that we have, to really meet up and stand up to those threats. And then, of course, it's not always about the wildlife and the important habitats. You know, we've got to think of us too and our enjoyment, and that's why these forests are really critical for making sure that we have places to enjoy these forests as well. And so this is just highlighting the Wombat Forest here. On the left-hand side, we've got a photo of the Loderderg Trail. Now, for those of you who are really keen hikers, the Loderderg Trail actually goes for about 90 kilometres. And I know a friend of mine actually did it in 3 days, which is quite an effort there, but that was one of his photos that he took from that hike there. And then for those of you who might think that's way too much, I just want, you know, a very short leisurely stroll. There's obviously the Domino Trail here, which the right hand side these folks are enjoying here as well. But it's not only the Wombat Forest. All of these forests have have really amazing walks that we can do to get out and enjoy. And one of those happens to be the Beeripmo walk at Mount Cole, which can really be done in a short day walk or as an overnight as well. And then we have water. We know how important water is for us all. You know, we wouldn't be able to survive very long without water. And these forests are really support so many different headwaters of different rivers here. And this is a photo of the Loderderg here. And many of the forests actually are really important refuges for water for northern and western suburbs of Melbourne. But if we do not get a new national park to protect these incredible values of these forests, the stark reality is they will be left open to logging, mining and other destructive uses. And this is a photo here of a logging coupe, a clearfell logging coupe in the forest of Mount Cole. This was only taken 2 years ago, and you can see me in there standing in amongst it. And I don't know how many of you have seen in real life logging coupes like this, but for me, just to be there standing in the middle of it, just surrounded by these trees just littering the floor, was a really harsh reality, which obviously fuels the passion a lot further to see these. But you know, you can drive around and see sites like this at Mount Cole just on the side of the road here quite easily. And so let's take a bit of a deeper look at some of this logging that's happening. And so this is Mount Cole. This is a map of Mount Cole here, just what the previous photo was showing. So these forests here have had areas that have in process to be logged, and you can see these here. So dark green area here is the proposed new national park. And these little red areas here are all the groups that have been planned to be logged over the last couple of years. But alarmingly, what happened, even as we knew that there was these new proposals for these new national parks, Big Forest announced on Christmas Eve, just last year, to announce a whole lot more new groups. And so this red box over here in the corner will highlight 7 new groups that weren't there before, 8 more intensive groups, so ones that had sort of more low-level logging have actually been bumped up to clearfell logging, and 4 of these groups happen to be in the area already proposed to be a national park. And so let me just highlight those to you now, and they are shown in those blue areas there. And just to give you a bit of context, some real life context for this is a photo of one of those logging groups, and you can see this sign here is a zoomed in version of what's stuck on the tree here with this arrow coming out of it. And you'll notice right just at the forefront of this tree is a Mount Cole grevillea plant. Now this photo was taken once this site was announced to be logged, and there was no protections in place to have this plant protected at all. But Mount Cole is not the only forest that are set to be logged. Unfortunately, if we take a look at the Wombat Forest here too, once again, those dark green areas do highlight the area of the proposed new national park. But unfortunately, if we don't get this, then it leaves Wombat Forest also open to logging, which you can see in these red areas here where those arrows are pointing out. And then once again, the Pyrenees, same deal once again. And also I wanted to mention the Pyrenees as well. Swift parrots have known to take refuge and come to the Pyrenees to feed as well, and to rely on all the different habitat types here as well. So, really home to incredible threatened species. And also Wellsford doesn't escape the equation either. So you can notice here that the dark green area is the area proposed for, the addition of the Bendigo National Park. And then the pink area here is proposed for the regional park, which does allow for some more recreational usage. But once again, these arrows here are pointing out the areas set to be logged. Now this photo on the left, which I'm sure Wendy's going to be highlighting to you more, is some of the very few left old and big trees that are left in this forest here, and they are currently located where these black dots are over here, and could be logged. So where are we at? So we've just gone through a bit of a journey about why we need these new national parks for the Central West, but still we are yet to see a decision made by our government. And the thing that I really wanted to draw your attention to here in this slide here is really just this bottom yellow yellow box here, which, as Matt was saying before, really has been, this campaign started back in the 90s, and now we have gone through 10+ years of community work to highlight the values of these forests with reports, 4 years of an independent expert process done to investigate these forests and, and the threats and the values, the release of 2 major reports, expert consultants, over almost 500 pages of expert documents, community reference groups, 60+ days of community consultation. So you can really gather that there has been such a thorough process that's really been undertaken here to look to where we've got now for these recommendation of new parks. But essentially what we have seen is still the government has not made a decision. And you'll notice here, just above here, if we look under this decision-making area, we can see that the final report was tabled in Parliament now almost 1 year ago. And so the government had 6 months from August last year, which brings us to February this year, to make a decision. And now, 6 months later, we are 1 year, actually this weekend is going to be the 1 year anniversary of when these reports were tabled in Parliament. So we are 1 year past the release of these formal reports, and we're 6 months past the legal deadline for when the government was due to make a decision. And so we're really at the stage now where so many people have been working tirelessly to try and get the government to implement these new national parks. And so far, we haven't seen the fruit of those efforts. But, you know, and the response really has been because of COVID and all the complications we're seeing in the world that we're living today. And, you know, whilst we do understand that that has caused significant hardships on the government and the efforts, the reality is that the government really did have 6 months prior to pre-COVID times to really make a decision and implement this work. And, you know, as much as I think what COVID has really done is really highlighted for all of us how much we really need nature in these times. And really, nature is one of our most important assets that we have. And we really need to, this is a time that we need to keep up the pressure. And very shortly, I'm going to be taking you through about some of the things that you can do now. And I think that as we go through these COVID times and realizing how, you know, nature actually is so good for our mental health and supporting, you know, all of life. If we can get those points more across and really continue to be active, then we hopefully will see some positive results and some positive decisions to implement these new national parks. So, but before we get onto that, we have another few amazing speakers to hear from. So now I wanted to introduce Jordan, who is another nature conservation campaigner with VMPA, and he's going to give you a bit more of an insight into some of the specifics and what he's been doing on the ground. So I'll let Jordan introduce himself to you all.
So we're going to take you deeper into the forests of Mount Cole, or Beeripmo, the traditional lands of the Beeripmo Bulag group that form part of the larger Djapurrung language speaking group. So as Shannon said, on Christmas Eve 2019, the state-owned logging company Vic Forest released their plans to increase the intensity of logging operations around Mount Cole and specifically around the Beeripmo Walk in threatened species habitat. Due to this, the VMPA and citizen science volunteers have been surveying the threatened forest of Mount Cole. Next slide. We've been surveying the forest for these two threatened wildflowers that should come up on the screen. The one on the left for you, I think, the yellow and brown one is the Grampians Beeripmo, which is a federally listed and state listed tall shrub. And then on the left there, the Mount Cole grevillea, one of the holly-leafed grevilleas found nowhere else on Earth, and also our newest listed threatened species here in Victoria, just being listed on the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act in 2019. So this is what the forests of Mount Cole look like to the logging industry. A whole lot of red scars that are about to appear on the landscape. And as you can see down here, the first one on the chopping block was Archie's Lookout Road Coop. So coop, when we say coop, it's an area of bushland that the state logging company has put a line around and decided we don't want a nice patch of bush there, we want to clear fell that and take the wood away. So Archie's Road Lookout was one of the first coops that we surveyed as a citizen science team, and luckily we found Mount Cole grevillea on the edge of that coop. So next slide. So just before COVID hit, we had teams out at Mount Cole surveying these logging coops, and we submitted a detection report to the state government. And as you can see, this is a map. The dark grey kind of red there shape is the logging coop, with Mount Cole grevillea around the centre of that coop and just within. And then a yellow area there is where the Divisia, or the Grampians Beeripmo, was found, right on the edge of the logging coop. So these two threatened species just holding on, just on the edge of the road and just within the logging coops, really just holding on to life. But the state government unfortunately went ahead with the logging, but protected small areas around those threatened plants. If it wasn't for the citizen scientists, those plants would be lost. Next slide. So we will continue to monitor the logging operations at Mount Cole, continue to advocate for the wonderful plants and animals. So we'll continue to survey these threatened forests of Mount Cole for the threatened species that call them home, those threatened species that are just holding on. In fact, the Grampians Beeripmo was thought to be extinct until 2004, when it was rediscovered on the next mountainside along from Mount Cole at Langigeran State Park. So the population at Mount Cole is a very important one and needs to be protected for future generations. And as you can see, the forests of Mount Cole are beautiful. They're a hidden gem, the western end of the Great Dividing Range, and a great place to stop in on your way to the Grampians or Garryword. So that's it for me, and hopefully once we're all out to play, everyone can come up to Mount Cole and survey for threatened species with us. Now we have Gail Osborne from Wombat Forest Care. She's the convener of Wombat Forest Care and a local legend. Here is Gail.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just checking I was unmuted. Wombat Forest Care is a community-based environment group with over 200 members, and we undertake a number of citizen science projects, including motion sensing cameras and spotlighting for greater gliders. And we've been campaigning with the VMPA and with BDEC and Bendigo for over 10 years to get these forests protected. So now I'm going to try and screen share. We'll see how this goes. So we're here in central Victoria where the red star is, and you can see how cleared the state is. So this is a map of the extent of native vegetation that's still left. And then to our west is Mount Cole, the Pyrenees, and then west of that, the Grampians and Grampians Garryword. The Wombat Forest is a regrowth forest. It was extensively logged and mined in the 1880s, and then from the 1970s for about 30 years it was heavily logged again for both timber and wood chip. And then logging ceased in 2006. But in this second round of logging, the creek lines were protected. So there's only about 10% of the Wombat Forest is mature forest, which is 100-year-old regrowth. So we do have no old growth forest. And so this is a photo of one of those protected gullies. So the trees there are approximately 100 years old. Despite this destruction, the wombat contains important habitat for 3 species listed as vulnerable. So we've got greater gliders, powerful owls, and brush-tailed phascogales. So here, this gorgeous greater glider. Throughout their range, their populations are decreasing by about 8% a year. And although we do not know whether they're secure in the wombat, we're finding them in good numbers. So Wombat Forest Care members have a spotlighting project and have added nearly 300 new records of greater glider sightings to the Biodiversity Atlas. So there we go again. And this is a map of the distribution, and we're just down here, right here, the western edge of their range. So we're the western edge of the range and the only population west of the Hume Highway. We also have powerful owl. So here's a powerful owl with a ringtail possum prey. And here we have a young that's just emerged from the hollow the night before, from the breeding hollow. And we showed this young owl to the VIAC staff when they came up to look around the Wombat Forest. And this is another young owl, same thing, where it's just out of its hollow, photographed with a parent, probably a male given the very heavy head. And these are some juveniles, so a little bit older and starting to colour up. We also have brush-tailed phascogales. They're vulnerable due to a loss of the habitat. 50% of the habitat has disappeared in the last 30 years. But we've got a good population that exists in the north of the Wombat, in the box and peppermint forests north of Wellsford. But we've also, with our cameras, we've recorded them in the southern sections of the Wombat Forest, in the dry, grassy peppermint ridges. And this is the very first brush-tailed phascogale we got on our camera projects. So this one's particularly special. And here we have another one in that same region. So onto our musk daisy and blackwood gullies. So the same photo I showed you before. Migratory birds. Many bird species migrate in spring to these musk daisy gullies to breed. We have rufous fantails, satin flycatchers, possibly coming all the way from New Guinea to the Wombat to nest. Rose robins and many more. The Wombat Forest is also recognised as a fungi hotspot. So these beautiful photos by Alison Pullio. But we have two species that are particularly special. This Sarcodon, only found in the Wombat Forest and still to be named. A PhD student's working on this one at the moment, but so far only place on the planet this species is known. And this Osculum species, earpick fungi, the only place it was known to exist was Blackwood, but there's now been a few more sightings of it around Emerald. And we have two endemic species. This one is the Wombat bush pea, but it's pretty tough. It's widespread and resilient. But the very special one is the Wombat leafless bosia. It's only known from 5 plants, so only 5 plants of this species are known to exist on the planet. It's rhizomal, so it's each plant is sort of covers a large area. This is listed as critically endangered. And then we've got our waterways. So we've got the Lerderderg, Moorabool and Werribee flowing south, and the Campaspe, Coliban and Loddon flowing north. So Wombat Forest Care have been carrying out camera monitoring, spotlighting for greater gliders and establishing breeding locations for powerful owls. And all that research has influenced the VIAC to make a recommendation of combination of parks for the Wombat Forest. They've recommended putting the high conservation areas into a combined Lerderderg Wombat new national park. In 2008, this report, in a 2008 report, the CSIRO said, protecting habitat is probably the best way to conserve species under climate change. So you would think that protecting the wombat would be obvious. If the Victorian government does not accept the VIAC recommendations for a park structure, the wombat will again be logged and mined. So we're continuing to campaign through the media and letters to politicians, and hopefully we will win this battle in the end. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass
Thank you. Thanks, Gail, so much. It was wonderful and so inspiring, all those amazing, amazing creatures. I've seen you talk about them so many times, but I still get really inspired every time I hear you share all of that information about the fantastic wildlife that lives in the wombat and the fungi that lives in the wombat. It's such a spectacular, special place. So thank you very much, Gail, for your wonderful presentation and all of the work that you and your group have been doing to care for the wombat for a long time. It's really wonderful and certainly very inspiring. So for now, what we'd like to do is to introduce Wendy Radford from the Wellsford Group, the Conservation Alliance up in Wellsford, and the Bendigo District Environment Council. Wendy, we'd love to hear from you.
That's good. Well, you won't see me, which suits me, but I can tell you about what's been going on up here in Bendigo.
Wonderful, thanks.
The Wellsford Forest is quite small by comparison with the Wombat and the Pyrenees, but we've all been working together because we understand that these are the last remnants of our valuable forests, and they all need to be protected. The Wombat, the Wellsford is 7,000 hectares of what VIAC has called the finest quality box ironbark forest that's left. As you know, Bendigo was cleared to the ground in the mining days, and people often say there's more timber under the ground than on top of the ground in Bendigo, put down there by the miners. Some of our forests were saved in the Greater Bendigo National Park, but this 7,000 block of solid forest, which is our biggest block, was sort of bargained off to the Rushworth Mill. So they could come in and log it, and the other forests could be declared national park. It was a political bargain. And then the government bought out the Rushworth Mill at the cost of $11 million anyway. So it did mean that the Wellsford was less heavily logged, but it still is on the books of Vic Forests to be logged. Now, what the slide you're seeing at the moment is Stuart Fraser, who has been working for this forest to go into park for 30 years plus. And we started, Bendigo and District Environment Council started agitating for this to go into park about 2002. And we also helped the formation of a bigger conservation group with 16 other groups in it called the Wellsford Conservation Forest Alliance. And our aim was to bring the community out into the Wellsford and let them see how lovely it is, what an amazing asset it is to have this right on the doorstep of Bendigo. Bendigo calls itself City in a Forest, but it isn't a city in a protected forest until this Wellsford is put into national and regional park. Could I have the next slide, please? This is just a gorgeous yellow-tufted honeyeater, which do come and feed on the ironbarks of the Wellsford Forest periodically, and you can see lots of lovely birds out there. Can I have the next slide, please? And we also have the brush-tailed phascogale or Tuan, and I know that Gail's told you a heap about them, but we have those in our other national parks, forests around Bendigo too, and a very successful recovery program in some of the national parks around Bendigo. No reason why there couldn't be in Wellsford once it was national park and protected. This will give you an idea of the glories of Wellsford in spring. What you're looking at there is the Clyptus daisy. You can see how magnificent the forest is in spring with the contrast of the dark ironbarks, and we have not the same ironbark as many other areas in Victoria. We've got the eucalyptus tricarpa, not sideroxylon. And the thing about the Wellsford is we have the last remaining pre-European ironbarks in public land that anybody knows about in this whole region. And they are in excess of 400 years old. And Shannon showed you a picture of them, one of them earlier. And they're a very precious thing to the Dja people and all of us who appreciate nature, that they have been here for 400 years. And nobody really knows why they were spared by the miners. In any case, the regrowth forest is very beautiful, as you can see. And in spring, the daisy bush and the gold dust wattle just make it magnificent. Thank you. We can now go into the next slide. This was Stuart again talking, myself and Glenda Verinder and Jenny Shield from BDEC and Wellsford Forest Conservation, talking to the VAC representatives who came up and spoke with us for three times during the consultation. But they also spoke with heaps of other people, the horse riding groups, the four-wheel drive groups. They did really thorough consultation. And they came up with what we think is a very fair report. We are looking at what we would hope would be national park now in that photo. And I was on the community consultation committee for Bendigo and the Box Ironbark forests. And the four-wheel drive representative there was thrilled to think this would be a national park, because we are not just wanting the habitat to be safe, but we also agree that if you are on the properly constructed roads, then you can drive your car in or ride your horse in to enjoy the forest. And we cannot really understand why it hasn't been declared a national park. And instead of that, it's still on Vic Forest's logging plans. And even the coop, which has the big old trees in it, is partially in there. The community support, could we see the next one, please? So it's just us looking with the VAC representatives, pointing out the important parts of the forest that we think should be put into park. There's tremendous community support for this. For instance, the City of Greater Bendigo Council voted unanimously to endorse the community campaign to have the whole of the Wellsford put into reserve. It runs between another section of the Bendigo Regional Park and the Sugarloaf Conservation Reserve, so it would make a lovely contiguous area of forest that would be preserved. The Dja Dja of the Kulin Nation, our local First Nation representatives, also want this declared park. They also want and join us in representing to VAC what their ideas are about having it as national park. A survey was done in the local paper, and 67% of Bendigonians want it to be national park. So there is an overwhelming support for it. And yes, I just want to thank VNPA and Shannon and Matt and everybody for keeping this campaign alive, when in fact it should already be finished. They should have declared the parks at the beginning of this year. And I think it's very good to keep people understanding that we haven't got away, that we do expect these forests to be protected in the long run and for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. You are free. So So Wendy and Gail, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to both of you. I know you definitely inspire us all, and you know, and me so much. You know, your dedication to this, to caring for these forests and getting these new national parks is so admirable. And yeah, you really inspire me. You've obviously been in it for the long haul. I haven't been in it quite so long, so thank you for all the work that you do and supporting your communities too in this really important campaign.
All right, thank you very much, Matt, and all of the panelists, everybody who's presented this evening. That's really wonderful. We're going to leave it there for tonight because we're running out of time. So thanks everybody very much for coming and joining us this evening. We'll